An American veteran saved a baby, the son of his enemy. He raised him as his own, despite the past. But years later, the boy learned who his real father was and made a choice that changed everything. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are watching from. I remember the smoke first, thick rolling smoke that curled around my boots and filled my lungs like poison. The air above the village shimmered with heat, as if the sun had leaned in too close, daring us to move. Dust clung to every surface, every wrinkle of my uniform, every exposed inch of skin. It was the kind of heat that didn't just press down on you, it crawled into you and sat there. We had been sent in before dawn. Intel had flagged a compound in the village as a potential hideout for Bahram Saidi's men fighters, responsible for at least a dozen U.S. casualties in the past 6 months. They weren't ghosts anymore. They were real, rooted, and violent. Command wanted them out, erased. I was part of the team assigned to make that happen. I remember crouching behind the shattered corner of a building, scanning rooftops through the haze. I could feel the tension humming through the guys around me. Fresh boots, too clean, too eager. They hadn't seen what I'd seen. They hadn't buried who I'd buried. Something felt off. I knew it before the first explosion. There's a silence before ambushes, like the world holding its breath. Then the fire erupted behind us, and the blast knocked me to the ground. I tasted sand and iron. The ringing in my ears was sharp and constant, like punishment. When I got up, 3 of our guys were already gone. I didn't need to check pulses, I knew. And Mike. Mike was face down in the rubble, his outstretched hand inches from his rifle. He was my closest friend. We'd done 2 tours together. He'd saved my ass more times than I could count. Now he was still and silent, the life gone out of him like a switch flipped. I couldn't feel grief then. Only a hollow kind of rage, like everything in me had gone quiet except the instinct to finish what we came to do. We secured the perimeter, cleared the buildings. Most were empty. Whatever enemy had been there was long gone. The firefight faded into silence, the kind that comes when everything living has either fled or died. My boots crunched over broken pottery, charred fabric, twisted metal. And then I heard it, a sound that didn't belong there. A cry. It was faint, muffled, too soft for a wounded soldier, too steady for an echo. I followed it, weaving through the remnants of what had once been homes. I found the sound in a half-collapsed hut, blackened from the inside, walls crumbling inward like a rotted fruit. I pushed through what was left of the doorframe and nearly turned back from the heat. But then I saw him, a bundle of cloth, buried under a broken beam and still crying. I moved the wood aside and reached in. My hands met something warm, fragile. The baby was tiny, maybe a few months old, face streaked with soot, fists curled in protest. His eyes were wide and furious. He screamed with every breath in his tiny lungs. Beside him, there was a woman. Her body was curled protectively, arms twisted in a final, useless shelter. Her skin was burned. Her face was turned away. But she had covered him. She had died doing it. I held the boy close to my chest, and he quieted, just for a second. My hands trembled as I adjusted the cloth wrapped around him. A corner slipped loose, revealing a familiar symbol sewn into the lining. I knew that insignia. I'd seen it on walls, on flags, on the shoulder patches of the men we were sent to kill. It was the mark of Bahram Saidi himself. That boy I held in my arms was his son. I stood there staring down at him. My mind rebelled against it. This child was the heir of the man who had orchestrated attacks that left American soldiers, my friends dead or broken. Mike was gone because of that man. And now I held his flesh and blood. I should have left him. Maybe not left him to die, but handed him off to local forces, to aid workers, to anyone else. Anyone but me. But my arms didn't move. I looked down at the boy, and I didn't see Saidi's face. I didn't see a threat. I saw life, raw and shivering and impossibly alive in a place built only for death. The radio crackled in my earpiece. Walker, report. I hesitated. I could have lied. I could have said nothing. Infant found, I said. Alive. No other survivors. There was a pause. You bringing him in? I looked down again. His eyes had closed, lashes thick with ash. He breathed in short, fast bursts against my chest. "Yeah," I said. "I'm bringing him in." When we flew out, he was swaddled in a fresh blanket, sleeping in my arms. No one asked questions. No one wanted to. We were all too tired, too numb, too eager to believe the nightmare had ended. Back at base, I started paperwork. I knew people, quiet people, people who owed me favors. I changed his name. Daniel Walker. Said he was the orphaned son of my brother and his wife, both killed in a car accident. It wasn't even the worst lie I'd ever told. I brought him home. Texas felt sharper when I returned, as if every blade of grass had grown teeth. The sun didn't warm me like it used to, but Daniel slept easily in the backseat of my truck, one hand curled under his chin. I carried him into the house. My house, empty and silent, except for the old creak of wood and the ticking of a dusty wall clock. I set him down in the room that had been a storage closet and started clearing space. I didn't know what I was doing. I hadn't held a baby since I was a teenager, and that had been under supervision. I didn't know what formula to buy, what brand of diapers fit, what lullabies worked. But I learned. I read manuals. I watched tutorials. I made mistakes. He didn't cry much. That worried me at first, but over time I realized he was watching. Always watching, like his little mind was taking in every crack of my voice, every tremor in my hand. I named him Daniel because it meant God is my judge. I figured he'd need that someday. I figured I would too. He grew fast, too fast. His legs wobbled before he was one, his eyes darkened to the color of wet earth. He smiled with half his mouth, like he knew something the rest of us didn't. He liked music, the old stuff, Cash, Haggard. He hated thunder. I didn't talk to him about where he came from. What could I say? That he was born of fire and vengeance? That his blood was tied to a man whose name was cursed in military briefings? I told him I loved him, when I could. I told him he was safe. I held him when he woke up screaming. I taught him how to walk, then how to run, then how to throw a ball and fix a tire. Every night I tucked him in, I whispered the same thing. You are mine. And every night I hoped that would be enough. But even then, even in the calm, I knew the truth would come. It always does. One way or another, fire comes back for what it missed. And I knew deep in the marrow of my bones that someday this boy would look at me with those dark, searching eyes and ask the question I feared most. And when that day came, I'd have to answer. Not as a soldier, not as a liar, but as the man who chose to hold him anyway. Raising Daniel was like walking a path I had never seen before. One step at a time. No map, no markers, just instinct and the dull ache of not knowing if I was doing anything right. The days melted into seasons, and before I knew it, the boy I'd pulled from the ashes was talking in full sentences, chasing grasshoppers in the yard, asking why the stars moved and why the neighbors stared. We lived quietly, just the two of us. The house was small, just enough for a man and a child, and all the unspoken things between them. I taught him to make his bed, tie his shoes, and clean a fish. He called me Uncle Tom. I didn't correct him. I figured someday he'd ask why we didn't look alike, why his skin was darker, why my hair grayed and his curled. But for a long time he didn't ask. He just lived, and I let him. The town we lived in wasn't cruel outright. It was polite in the way small towns are, smiles with edges, nods that lasted too long. Most folks knew I'd come back from the war a little quieter, a little harder. When they saw me with Daniel, they assumed he was the son of a cousin or a refugee kid I'd helped in service. No one asked much, but they looked, especially as he got older. He was 7 when he came home from school with dirt on his face and his lip trembling. I asked what happened. He said nothing, just went to his room and sat in the corner, arms around his knees. I waited like I always did when he got quiet. Later that night, while I washed dishes, he stood in the doorway and said, "One of the boys said I'm not from here." I dried my hands and turned to him. "What do you think?" He shrugged. "I don't feel not from here." I walked over, knelt beside him, and looked him in the eye. "You live here, you learn here, you sleep and eat here. You're from here. That's what matters." He nodded like he believed me, but I could see it. the seed of doubt, planted, watered by whispers. The next time it rained, it would grow. Over the years, the questions came slowly, first from others, then from him. Is he adopted? A woman asked me at a school fundraiser, her smile brittle. He's my boy, I answered. I mean biologically. I looked her square in the eyes. He's mine where it counts. She didn't speak to me again. The school tried. They really did. But teachers watched him like they expected him to snap. Kids picked him last. Parents hesitated to schedule play dates. A few times he came home with bruises and stories about accidents. I talked to the principal, but he only offered policy statements. Zero tolerance this, equal treatment that. I knew what it meant. Keep your head down. Keep your boy quiet. Daniel never got loud. He never fought back. He watched. He learned how to read people's silences better than their words. When they complimented his grades but avoided shaking his hand. When they praised his manners but never invited him over. He saw it all. He asked me once, "Do you think people can see I'm different?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted to lie. I wanted to say no, they just don't know you yet. But that would have made me a coward. Yeah, I said, but different doesn't mean wrong. He nodded slowly. Did you ever feel that way? When you came back? All the time. How did you stop feeling it? I didn't. I just stopped letting it decide who I was. He didn't say anything more that night, but I saw something shift in him, like he understood there wouldn't be an easy fix, that the world might never clap him on the back and welcome him in, that he'd have to walk through it anyway. As he hit his teens, things got harder. He got taller, stronger. His voice dropped. He started drawing, sketching faces with more emotion than I'd ever managed to say out loud. He filled notebooks with cities he'd never been to, names he wasn't sure were his. He got good grades, too good. Some teachers accused him of cheating. One of them told him, to his face, "You speak English so well." He came home that day angrier than I'd ever seen him. "What does that even mean?" he asked me, pacing the living room. "It means she's ignorant," I said. "That's all. I've lived here my whole life. How do they not know I'm from here? They know. Some just don't want to admit it." That night he asked me, "Who am I really?" I felt it then, the shift, the crack in the dam. I saw it coming for years, but nothing prepared me for the sound of those words. "You're Daniel," I said. "You're smart. You're kind. You work hard. You're my boy." That's not what I mean. I sat down, rubbed my hands together, stared at the floor. "You were born far from here, in a place I was sent to fight. I found you there. You were a baby, alone. Your family was gone. I couldn't leave you. I brought you back." He didn't say anything. He didn't cry. He just stood there, face blank. "You're not my blood," I said, "but you're mine." He nodded slowly, turned, and walked to his room. The next morning he was gone. No note, no message. Just gone. My chest felt like it was collapsing in on itself. I didn't call the cops. I knew he wasn't in danger. He just needed space. Still, I checked the roads, the bus stations, his favorite diner. Nothing. He came back that night, sometime after midnight. I found him sitting on the porch staring out at the field. "Where'd you go?" "Austin." "What for?" "Records." I swallowed hard. "You find them?" He nodded. "My birth certificate. It says I'm not yours. It says I'm Saidi." Her name hit the air like a match to dry grass. He'd found the truth, the part I'd buried deeper than any grave. "I was going to tell you," I said. "When?" "When I thought you were ready." "What about you? Were you ever ready?" "I didn't have a choice." He looked at me then, and I saw it all, the betrayal, the confusion, the hurt. "You had a choice," he said. "You just didn't trust me with it." He stood and went inside. I sat out there for hours, listening to the wind rattle through the trees, wondering if I'd done the right thing at all. He left for college 2 weeks later. Berkeley, full scholarship, political science. He packed light, said goodbye with a hug that didn't last long enough. I watched him drive away and felt the weight of every silence I'd ever let linger between us. He was mine, but not by blood, not by name, just by the choice I made in a burned-out village, holding a child who didn't belong to anyone. And now, for the first time, I wasn't sure if he still belonged to me. Berkeley didn't feel like home, but it didn't feel like judgment either. And that was enough at first. The city had movement, rhythm, colors layered over noise. No one looked at me like I didn't belong. No one asked where I was from in that slow, suspicious way. They asked about my major, my interests, my thoughts on international law. And I answered, because I could. Because for the first time in my life, my voice wasn't followed by silence. I made friends. Not many, but enough. Priya, who had a way of listening that made you speak more than you meant to. Amir, who barely said a word in person, but sent me articles at 3 a.m. with subject lines like, "This sounds like your story. We studied late, argued about politics, shared takeout on the floor of our dorm rooms, while the world outside tried to tear itself apart." But inside those walls, I started to piece something together, a version of myself that didn't have to explain who I was to be accepted. I kept my past close, folded like a note in my back pocket. I didn't lie about Tom. I called him my father when it felt true, and it did most of the time. I told them I was born overseas, that things were complicated, but I never said the name Saidi, not once. That name sat like lead in my chest, waiting for the day it would pull me under. That day came sooner than I expected. It started with a letter-white envelope, government seal. I remember the way my hands shook when I opened it, like some part of me already knew. There were words like inconsistencies, investigation, status review. My citizenship, it said, was under examination. I stared at the page for so long the letters began to blur. I took it to Priya. "This is real?" I asked. She read it, eyes moving fast, fingers tightening at the corners. "It's real. Can they take it away?" She didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. We found a lawyer through the university. His name was Lopez, a tall man with tired eyes and a voice that didn't flinch. I told him everything, from the burned village to the false documents to the name change. He didn't blink, just took notes. "You're lucky," he said, "or unlucky depending on how you look at it. If you'd applied for citizenship now, this would be open and shut against you. But you've got time. You've got roots. What do I do? Stay quiet, stay here, and prepare to be questioned." He worked fast, filed appeals, gathered school records, personal letters, testimonials, but the government's questions kept coming. I was asked to verify where I was born, how I arrived, who had signed what, and when. They pulled at every thread of the story Tom had built, looking for tears. The university froze my aid package until it was resolved. My job application for a summer internship was rejected when they saw the red flag in my file. I couldn't renew my driver's license. I couldn't apply for a passport. For the first time in my life, I felt like a ghost in the country that had raised me. I called Tom. First time in months. "They're saying I don't belong here," and I said. "They're wrong," he replied. "You lied to them. You lied to me. I tried to keep you safe." I didn't yell. I wanted to, but I didn't. The silence on the line stretched until he finally said, "I'm sorry." It didn't change anything. I sat on the edge of my bed that night, holding the birth certificate I'd found back in Austin. My name, Daniel Saidi. My birthplace, Laghman Province, Afghanistan. No father listed, no trace of the man who had created me. Just a ghost in the shadow he cast. The next morning, Priya handed me a flyer. "It's a volunteer program," she said, "in Jordan. They send students to refugee camps for humanitarian work. It's not a solution, but maybe I'd find something out there. A piece of myself I didn't know was missing." I signed up that afternoon. The camp in Jordan was a different world. Rows of tents stretched into the horizon, flapping in the wind like forgotten prayers. The dust got into everything, your clothes, your throat, your thoughts. But the people were alive. Tired, scared, hopeful, but alive. I worked in supply distribution by day, helped teach English by night. I slept on a cot in a tent with 5 others. I didn't need much. I didn't expect anything. But then I met her. She was older, wrapped in green fabric that shimmered slightly in the sun. Her name was Fatima. She worked in the medical tent, organizing supplies with a precision I envied. We spoke in broken Arabic and English. She liked to ask questions, quiet, direct, sharp as glass. On the third day, she asked about my name. Saidi? I froze. Yes. Her eyes didn't change. She just nodded. My brother was Bahram, she said. The world tilted. She invited me to her tent later that evening, lit a small lamp, poured tea, told me stories I didn't expect, about a boy who grew up in the mountains, laughed too loud, fought too early, about how he became a soldier, then a leader, then something else entirely. He wasn't always like what you read, she said, but war changes the shape of protection. She didn't try to make him a hero. She didn't deny his violence. She just gave him back his humanity. He died thinking his son had died too, she said. If he'd known you lived. She didn't finish the sentence. I didn't cry. I couldn't. But I felt something shift inside me, less a healing and more a rebalancing. Like the parts of me that had never fit together were finally touching, even if it still hurt. She gave me a photo. Bahram as a young man standing beside her, both of them smiling. No guns, no flags, just siblings. Remember him this way too, she said. When I returned to Berkeley, I walked different. No one else noticed, but I did. My feet felt heavier, my back straighter. Lopez called 2 days later. Hearings next week. You ready? No, I said, but I'll be there. I brought everything, the photo, the stories, my grades, my awards, my years of being American by everything but blood. The judge asked me if I had anything to say. I stood, palms damp, voice steady. I was born to a man I never knew, I said, in a country I haven't seen since I was an infant. That man made choices I'll never defend, but he also died believing his child was gone. I was raised by a man who made a different choice, who pulled me from fire and gave me a name. He taught me to work, to speak, to stay. If that doesn't make me American, I don't know what does. The judge stared at me for a long time. Then he nodded. Citizenship upheld. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. I called Tom. He answered, voice weaker than I remembered. You were right, I told him. About what? I belong. He didn't say anything for a long time. You coming home? Yeah, I said. I think it's time. He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. We'd both been waiting a long time. The Texas road stretched out before me, flat and long, lined with the same fields I'd passed so many times in childhood. I drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting loosely in my lap, my mind quiet in a way I hadn't felt in years. Every time I blinked, memories flickered behind my eyes. The way the sun used to hit the porch at dusk, the sound of the screen door creaking open, Tom's boots by the threshold, always muddy, always in place. I didn't know what I expected to find when I pulled into the gravel driveway, but I didn't expect the feeling in my chest. Not exactly dread, not quite peace, something heavier, something final. The house was smaller than I remembered, more faded around the edges. The paint had peeled back from the wooden panels, and the grass reached past my ankles as I stepped out of the car. The flag was gone. The porch creaked beneath my feet. The wind carried the scent of dust and sun-warmed wood. The only thing that hadn't changed was the silence. He was sitting in the rocking chair, the same one he used to fall asleep in after long days fixing things that didn't really need fixing. He looked thinner, his skin looser around his jaw, his shoulders sloped in a way that hadn't been there before. But he was still Tom. My Tom. His eyes flicked toward me as I approached, and a slow smile crept across his face. Took you long enough, he said, voice rough. I swallowed hard. Yeah, guess it did. Get inside. Looks like you brought dust with you. I stepped onto the porch and stood there for a moment. Then I crossed the threshold. Inside, everything was familiar. The same faded sofa, the same rug with the frayed corner, the same smell of wood polish and coffee. But the house had gone quiet, lived in, but not alive. The calendar on the wall was stuck in March. The kitchen sink was filled with dishes. The fridge hummed louder than I remembered, like it was struggling to keep going. I looked back at him. You eating? I asked. He shrugged. Enough. I didn't argue. I just started making a list in my head: groceries, laundry, a proper chair for the living room, maybe a nurse if he'd let me. He watched me move around like I hadn't left, and for a little while, We didn't talk about anything that mattered. We just existed. The next morning he didn't get up. I found him in bed staring at the ceiling, his breathing shallow. I sat beside him. You okay? Just tired. You seen a doctor? Used to? You should have called me. I didn't want to worry you. You think that worked? He gave a soft laugh, dry and quiet. You're here now. I helped him to the recliner in the living room, made coffee, brought him toast he didn't eat. For a few days that became the rhythm. I'd read in the mornings, fix what I could in the afternoons, and sit with him in the evenings, talking about nothing football, old neighbors, the weather. It was enough for both of us. Then one night, he spoke while I was folding laundry. There's a letter. I turned to him. Where? Top drawer in the nightstand. Meant to send it to you. Couldn't. I found it later, sealed and yellowed around the edges. I opened it in the living room, sitting across from him. The handwriting was familiar, rigid, deliberate, like he was trying to make every word count. Daniel, if you're reading this, you probably already know more than I ever wanted you to. I don't have the right words for most of this, but I'll give you what I've got. You were screaming when I found you, loud and alive in a place where everything else had gone quiet. I don't know why I picked you up. Maybe I saw something in your eyes. Maybe I couldn't stand to leave another body behind. I told myself it was duty, but it wasn't. I didn't raise you out of guilt. I raised you because once I held you, I couldn't not. I knew what you were, whose you were. I knew the blood that ran in your veins had been used to hurt men like me, but I also knew that blood didn't get to decide who you became. I lied to the government, lied to you. Maybe that was wrong, probably was, but I'd do it again, because you were a boy who needed someone, and I was a man who needed something to believe in. You're not my blood, but you are my choice, and that counts for something. Tom. When I looked up, he was watching me. You mean it? I asked. Every word. I folded the letter and placed it in my pocket. Thanks, I said. That was the last real conversation we had. A few days later, he was gone. He passed in his sleep, quiet and still. I found him early in the morning, the house so silent it felt wrong. I stood in the doorway for a long time before I moved. Then I sat beside him, held his hand, and said nothing. The funeral was small, a few old friends, a couple of neighbors. No flag, no fanfare, just the way he wanted. We buried him in the field behind the barn, under a tree that bloomed late every spring. The sun was warm on my back. The sky was so blue it almost hurt to look at. I spoke last. He wasn't my father by blood, I said, voice steady, but he was the man who chose to carry me when no one else did. He gave me a name, a home, a life. He taught me how to be a man, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And that choice means more than any name on a birth certificate. I paused, looking out at the people gathered, most of whom barely knew the story. He gave me the tools to build something out of the pieces I was left with. He didn't ask for anything in return, except maybe that I try to do the same for someone else. So I will. The wind moved through the grass. The casket sank slowly into the ground. I stayed until the last shovelful of earth had been laid. I didn't leave the house right away. I stayed through the summer, fixing things, repainting the porch, donating what I didn't need. I kept his boots, I kept the chair, I kept the letter. Then I started the paperwork. The Walker Foundation opened the next year, a small nonprofit focused on helping kids caught between world's orphans, refugees, displaced youth. We offered legal help, education support, counseling. It wasn't much, but it was something. I traveled to schools, spoke at community centers, told my story, not for sympathy, not for attention, but because I knew there were others like me, kids who didn't know where they came from, didn't know who they were allowed to be. One afternoon, I was speaking at a middle school when a boy raised his hand. "Who was your real dad?" he asked. I smiled. "My real dad?" I said. "He was a man who didn't have to love me, but did anyway. He pulled me from fire, gave me a name, and taught me to live with honor. That's who he was." The boy nodded. No more questions. I walked off the stage, heart full, hands steady. I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't an orphan. I wasn't a son by birth. But I was his choice, and now that choice was mine to carry. If this story touched you, make sure to subscribe for more powerful true life narratives. Watch the next video to see another story that will stay with you. And don't forget to share this one with someone who needs to hear it.